Welcome to the channel. Today, we step into one of the most dramatic conflicts of the ancient world. A war so devastating that it nearly erased Rome from history. This is the story of Hannibal, and the war that brought the Roman Republic to the brink of annihilation world before the storming the 3rd century BC. The Mediterranean was not yet a Roman lake. It was contested water, blue, restless, and filled with ambition. To the south stood Carthage, wealthy, maritime, powerful, founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers from Tyre. It had grown into a commercial empire, stretching across North Africa, southern Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and parts of Sicily. Carthage did not build legions, it built fleets. Its harbors were engineering marvels. Its merchant ships sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Silver flowed from Iberian mines, grain came from Africa. Trade was its bloodstream, and yet beneath its prosperity lay humiliation. Datus. Before Hannibal's birth, Carthage had fought Rome in the First Punic War. After 23 years of brutal struggle, Rome emerged victorious. Carthage lost Sicily, then Sardinia. It paid crushing indemnities. The defeat burned into Carthaginian memory. One man above all refused to accept it. His name was Hannibal Barca. Hannibal's father, an oath of HistorYocumentary to the historian Polybius. Hamilcar brought his young son before an altar before departing for Spain, placing his hand upon a sacrificial offering. He made the boy swear eternal enmity toward Rome, whether literal or symbolic. The story Indiretti will never be a friend to Rome. Hannibal would later embody in action. Spain became Carthage's new frontier. There the Barcid family carved out a power base rich in silver and manpower. Carthage would rebuild not through submission, but through preparation. Hannibal grew up not in comfort, but in camps. He learned languages, tactics, and the temperament of diverse peoples: Iberians, Numidians, Gauls. He learned how mercenary armies thought. He learned how to lead men who were not bound by citizenship, but by loyalty and reward. By his mid-20s, he commanded cavalry. By his late 20s, he commanded Spain, and into 19 BC, he made his move. Saguntum, the Spark. The city of Saguntum lay south of the Ebro River, within Carthage's sphere of influence, yet it was allied with Rome. Hannibal besieged it for 8 months. The walls held Roman envoys, protested. Carthaginian politicians hesitated. Saguntum fell. Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender. Carthage refused. In the 18 BC war was declared. This was the beginning of the Second Punic War, a conflict that would last 17 years and reshape the Mediterranean forever. But Hannibal did not plan to fight Rome in Spain. He did not plan to wait for Roman legions to arrive in Africa. He chose something far more audacious. Would invade Italy itself. Between Spain and Italy stood the Pyrenees, behind them hostile Gaul land. Beyond the Alps no ice sheer cliffs. Narrow passes. No major army had ever crossed them with intent to invade Italy. Hannibal would have assembled a multinational force: Iberian infantry with oval shields and curved swords, Libyan spearmen hardened by desert campaigns, swift Numidian cavalry armed with javelins, and war elephants, towering beasts whose very presence terrified horses unaccustomed to their sententious horses' claim. He began with around 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 elephantsmen. If exaggerated, the force was formidable. Yet Hannibal's genius was not numerical, it was psychological. Understood something essential about Rome's strength lay not merely in its armies, but in its alliances. Italian city-states supplied troops. If those allies could be broken, Rome would bleed internally. So Hannibal aimed not just to defeat Rome's legion, shamed to shatter Rome's political structure. Yes, he marched north from Spain. He did so not as a reckless invader, but as a strategist executing a lone calculated gambler. Rome prepares. Meanwhile, Rome expected war, but not invasion. Senate believed the conflict would unfold in Spain and North Africa. Roman consuls prepared fleets. Legions were raised. Roman confidence bordered on arrogance. They had defeated Carthage. Before they would do so, against Roman military system was resilient citizen soldiers. Trained rigorously, their manipulative formations allowed flexibility on varied terrain. Their discipline was legendary. They underestimated one thing: they underestimated Hannibalino. The unknown Hannibal crossed the Ebro, subdued tribes who resisted. Others joined him. Losses mounted even before reaching Gaul. Desertion thinned his ranks. Still, he pressed forward. When he reached the Rhine River, Roman forces were already maneuvering in southern Gaul. Hannibal outpaced them, crossing the river upstream, constructing rafts to ferry elephants across swirling currents. The sight must have been surreal: massive animals standing uneasily upon floating platforms, handlers guiding them through cold mist as drums echoed along the banks. Roman consul Publius Cornelius Scipio arrived. Alata. Hannibal was already heading toward the mountain sand. Ahead lay the greatest gamble of his life. The Alps rose like a wall against the sky. Jagged white, unforgiving winter approached. Head food ran short. Hostile tribes waited. in ambush along narrow mountain paths. An entire army would attempt what few men dared alone. Many would never descend it. If Hannibal succeeded, if he emerged into northern Italy, with even a fraction of his force, Rome would face an enemy it never expected, and the war would enter its most astonishing chapter. Commanders' armies. And the march over the Alps march toward Italy was not merely a movement of troops, it was a test of leadership, endurance, and will, and at its center stood Hannibal, not yet 30 years old, commanding an army unlike any Rome had said. Hannibal, commander of many peoples, Hannibal was not a Roman general, leading citizen soldiers bound by shared law and identity. His army was multinational: Iberians, Libyans, Gauls, Numidians, Balearic slingers, men of different languages, weapons, customs, and loyal to sick diversity could fracture under pressure. But Hannibal possessed a rare gift. He understood men. Polybius describes him as tireless in hardship, moderate in personal habits, capable of enduring heat and cold alike. He ate little, slept lightly, and shared danger with his troop. He was not distant. He was present in the saddle, in the mud, in the snow, knew when to inspire, when to threaten, and when to promise rewards. Cavalry commander was Hannibal, a brilliant Numidian leader, whose light horsemen would become one of Hannibal's deadliest tools. Fast, fearless masters of Hitandran warfare, they could harass Roman flanks, chase fleeing enemies, and disrupt formations. Before the heavy infantry, even Ingagad, Hannibal's infantry corps consisted of Libyan spearmen, disciplined and steady, alongside Iberian warriors wielding the falcata, a curved blade designed for brutal close combat. The Balearic slingers carried leather pouches filled with stones or lead bullets capable of cracking skulls at astonishing distance. And then there were the elephants, massive armored beasts, imported from North Africa, towering above the battlefield. Their psychological impact was often greater than their physical one. Horses panicked at their scent, infantry hesitated at their charge. But elephants were also fragile in cold climates, and the Alps were merciless. The Roman system opposite Hannibal stood the structured military machine of the Roman Republic. Roman armies were raised annually, commanded by elected consuls. They were organized into manageable small tactical units that allowed flexibility on uneven terrain. Unlike the rigid phalanxes of older Greek armies, Roman formations could bend without breaking. Each legionary carried a large rectangular shield, the scudum reinforced with iron. A short stabbing sword, the gladius, was designed for close lethal thrusts beneath the enemy's ribs. Heavy javelins, pella, were thrown before engagement, their soft iron shanks bending on impact, rendering enemy shields useless. Roman soldiers trained relentlessly. They built fortified camps every night. They marched in disciplined columns. They obeyed orders without questioning. Most critically, Rome could replace losses. Its manpower reserves were vast. Hannibal could not afford attrition. Rome cooled Dino the Pyrenees and beyond as Hannibal pushed through the Pyrenees. Resistance from local tribes forced him into skirmishes that cost precious lives. Some soldiers deserted, unwilling to march farther into unknown lands. By the time he reached the Rhine, his army had already shrunk significantly. The river crossing was a masterpiece of improvisation. Timber was lashed together to form rafts. Elephants were coaxed aboard with earth piled upon floating platforms to simulate solid ground. When some animals panicked and fell into the water, they swam, guided by their trunks like snorkels. Roman forces under Publius Cornelius Scipio narrowly missed intercepting him. Hannibal did not linger, turned toward the looming Alps. The climbed Alpine ascent remains one of the most astonishing feats in military history. Narrow trails carved into cliffs, snowstorms reducing visibility to meters, tribes ambushing from above rolling rocks onto marching columns, supply animals slipping into ravenous. Ancient sources describe men losing fingers and toes to frostbite, horses collapsing from exhaustion, elephants struggling on icy slopes. At one particularly treacherous pass, landslides blocked the route. Hannibal reportedly ordered fires built against rock faces, then poured vinegar to crack the heated stone. Though modern historians debate this account whether literal or symbolic, the message was clear: obstacles would be broken at the summit. Hannibal is said to have gathered his exhausted troops and pointed south toward the fertile plains of Italy, visible in the distance. There lies the land, he may have told them, where we shall conquer. When the army finally descended into northern Italy, it was a shadow of its former strength. Estimates suggest fewer than 30,000 infantry and perhaps 6,000 cavalry remained. Most of the elephants had perished, but Hannibal had achieved the impossible. Hay stood in Italy. Shock in Rome. News spread rapidly. An enemy army had crossed the Alps. An army Rome had not expected to see. Roman commanders scrambled to react. Consular armies were redirected northward. Italian allies were reassured or pressured to remain loyal. Hannibal's gamble had paid off strategically. Now it had to pay off tactical Epichistory. His diminished army could not defeat Roman legions on Italian soil. The Alpine crossing would become nothing more than a heroic tragedy. The first test would come near the river Trebion. Rome would learn painfully that Hannibal did not fight like other generals fought to unmake armless weapons, armor, and the art of war before. We step onto the blood-soaked fields of Italy, we must understand the instruments of destruction, the weapons, armor, and tactical systems that would define this war, because the Second Punic War was not merely a clash of numbers, it was a clash of military philosophies. Carthaginian war Machina. Hannibal's army was not uniform in appearance. An Iberian warrior stood bareheaded or wore a simple bronze helmet, his oval shield painted with tribal patterns, reds, ochre spirals of black across his chest hung leather, or bronze scales at his side curved the falcata, a forward-weighted sword designed to hack and cleave. With devastating for Celebian infantry, by contrast, were more disciplined in formation. They carried long thrusting spears and round shields. Some were captured Roman armor later in the war, adapting enemy equipment. With pragmatic efficiency, Balearic slingers were lightly clothed, carrying multiple slings of varying lengths wrapped around their heads and waists. Their projectiles, smooth stones or cast-lead bullets, could fracture bone at distances beyond effective javelin range. Most feared of all were the Numidian cavalry, lightly armored. Riding without saddles, they carried small round shields and bundles of javelins. They did not charge in tight formation. They swarmed, they circled, they feigned retreat and returned suddenly. Their agility contrasted sharply with heavier Roman horsemen. Then there were the elephants, towering creatures fitted sometimes with wooden towers or simple cloth armor. Their tusks could be tipped with iron. Their bulk alone could shatter tight formations, especially in the early years before Romans adapted. Hannibal did not rely on uniformity, relied on complementary strengths. Each unit was a tool in a larger design. The Roman legionary system, the Roman legion of the 3rd century BC, was a masterpiece of organization. It was divided into manifold small units arranged in a checkerboard formation across 3 lines, the hastati in front, principes behind them, and triaries. The final reserve. Young soldiers fought in the front ranks. Veterans stood behind. Each legionary carried a pella, heavy javelins designed to penetrate shields and bend upon impact. After throwing them, the Roman advanced with his gladius, a short double-edged sword ideal for thrusting under ribs or into exposed throats. The scutum, large, rectangular, slightly curved, created a wall. When soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, its iron boss could punch or shove behind it. A disciplined Roman could advance methodically. Roman camps were constructed every evening with geometric precision, ditches dug, palisades erected. Order was ingrained. Roman commanders valued straightforward engagement, break the enemy line. Percival Hannibal, however, valued manipulation, did not merely meet Roman formations, reshaped the battlefield around them. First lessons, Trebia and Lake Trasimene. At the river Trebia into 18 BC, Hannibal demonstrated his understanding of terrain and timing. He lured Roman forces under Tiberius Sempronius Longus across an icy river before dawn. Cold water soaked their armor, hunger weakened them. Then Carthaginian forces engaged frontally, while a hidden detachment under Hannibal Barca struck from concealment in reeds and brushed the Roman formation. Fractured, thousands died in the freezing mud the following year. At the Lake Trasimene, Hannibal executed one of the largest ambushes in ancient history, concealed his army in hills and forests along a narrow lakeside road. Roman consul Gaius Flaminius marched into a mist-covered defile. Unaware, the signal Carthaginian forces descended from 3 sides. There was no orderly formation, no time to deploy manifolds. It was slaughter. Polybius describes chaos, men cut down before forming ranks, others driven into the lake to drown in armor. The heavy just when Flaminius himself fell in combat. In 2 years, Hannibal had annihilated multiple Roman armies, but Rome did not surrender. The dictator and the strategy of delay. After Trasimene, Rome appointed the dictator Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius refused. Pitched battle shadowed Hannibal, harassed supply lines, avoided direct engagement. For this, Romans mocked him, calling him cunctator. The Dele riot. His strategy recognized the truth. Hannibal excelled at tactical annihilation. In battle, and his brilliance had fewer outlets, but Rome's political culture despised inaction, and eventually impatient consuls would abandon Fabian caution. They would assemble the largest army Rome had ever fielded. They would seek decisive confrontation. Place would be a dusty plain near the village of Cannae, and there Hannibal would construct the most perfect battlefield trap of antiquity. Stage with set weapons, sharpened dalliances tested. On one side stood the largest army Rome had ever raised, on the other a smaller battle-hardened force, led by a commander who understood something fundamental. Victory is not always achieved by strength cementims, it is achieved by designing a canny design. With eclipse strength Battle of Cannae Rome surrounded the year was 216 Rome had endured. Humiliation at Trebius, shock at Lake Trasimene, years of marching. Skirmishing anxiety to know, the Republic resolved to end it, they would crush Hannibal in open battle. The largest army Rome had ever assembled. Consuls that year were Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Between them they commanded perhaps 80,000 infantry and over 6,000 cavalry, an army of unprecedented size. Citizens, allies, veterans, young recruits, all drawn into one massive force. Never before had Rome concentrated such manpower in a single field. Varro favored aggression. He believed numbers would overwhelm the Carthaginian line. Paulus was more cautious, aware of Hannibal's cunning. But command alternated daily between them. Hannibal, by contrast, had perhaps 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. Without number, Ed chose the battlefield. Himself a wide dusty plain near the village of Cannae in Apulia. Open ground perfect for cavalry maneuver. He deployed his army in a formation that appeared almost reckless. At the center stood his Iberian and Gallic infantry ranged in a shallow, convex arc bulging outward toward the Romans. On the flanks stood his hardened Libyan heavy infantry, angled slightly inward on the wings. Cavalry to Roman eyes, the center looked vulnerably. That was precisely the point. Morning of blood in the morning of August 2nd, the hot Apulian wind, the Volturnus, blew dust into Roman. Faccius Varro held command that day. He ordered advanced Roman infantry packed tightly together, deeper than usual, seeking brute force break through. Their massive formation surged forwards like a living wall of shields, and Ide struck Hannibal's center. Iberians and Gauls absorbed the impact. Still rang against steel shields. Splintered men screamed in multiple languages. The convex Carthaginian center began to bend inward under Roman pressure. Roman commanders, it appeared as if victory was nearly pressed harder, but the arc bending inward was not collapsing, it was transformation. Bamble had designed flexibility into his center. Step by step they withdrew in controlled fashion, turning the convex line into a concave pocket. Romans advanced into a deeper Timer compressed meanwhile on the flanks. Carthaginian cavalry under Hannibal crushed the Roman horse. Numidians harassed, encircled, and drove them from the field with Roman cavalry routed. Carthaginian horsemen wheeled around behind the Roman infantry, and then came the decisive momenti double envelopmentus. The Roman infantry pushed forward into the pocket. Hannibal's Libyan heavy infantry on both flanks pivoted inward like massive doors swinging shut. Their long spears struck Roman sides. Now exposed, Roman formation packed tightly had little room to maneuver. Shields face forward attacks now came from left and right, then from behind. Cavalry closed the final exit. Roman army was surrounded. Completalia was not a rowdy, it was compressionist of men pressed together so tightly that movement became impossible. Those in front could not retreat, those in back could not advance. Heat intensified, dust-choked lungs. Ancient accounts describe men suffocating, upright, crushed by the weight of their comrades. Others were cut down where they stood, unable even to raise their arms. Battle lasted for horses. Systematic slaughter. Paulus fell fighting. Varro escaped with a fragment of cavalry, one of the few Roman leaders ever to survive such catastrophe. When it ended, perhaps 5,000 to 70,000 Romans lay dead. It was one of the bloodiest single-day battles in ancient history. Polybius would later write that never had such destruction befallen a Roman army. Hannibal had achieved the perfect tactical victory, a double envelopment so complete that it would be studied for over a millennia. Even modern generals would analyze Cannae. Victory on the battlefield did not equal victory in war. After Cannae, Hannibal reportedly urged immediate march on Rome itself. You know how to win a victory, he is said to have told Hannibal, but not how to use one. Whether the quote is authentic or not, it captures the tension. Hannibal did not march on Rome. Instead, he sought to break its alliances. Some southern Italian cities defected. Capua joined him, but many others remained loyal. Rome refused to negotiate, refused to surrender, refused even to ransom prisoners. Instead, it did something extraordinary. It rebuilt, and as Hannibal campaigned through Italy year after year, the Republic would adapt, endure, and search for a leader capable not merely of surviving Hannibal, but defeating him. That leader would rise from the very family that had once failed to stop the invasion. His name was Scipio, and the war would leave Italy, returning to Africa itself. Fall of Hannibal and the survival of Rome. After Cannae, the world expected Rome to collapse. It did not. Instead, the Republic did something that astonished even its enemies. It endured. Rome refuses to deed. Senate forbade public mourning. No negotiations, no surrender. New legions were raised from boys barely of age, and men far beyond its slaves were armed and promised freedom. Wealth was taxed, gold was melted. Rome adopted Fabian's strategy, once more avoiding major confrontation with Hannibal in Italy. Harassing, containing, and during Hannibal roamed the Italian countryside for more than a decade. He won battles, attracted allies, but he never broke Rome's core. Alliance system-laden colonies stayed loyal to Republic, absorbed losses that would have destroyed others. To Tacitus, the historian Livy later wrote, Rome's greatness lay not only in victory, but in refusal to yield. And then in Spain, a new Roman commander began to change the balance. At the rise of Scipio, his name was Scipio Africanus, the son of Publius Cornelius Scipio, the same consul who had once failed to intercept Hannibal in Gaul. Young, charismatic, audacious Scipio studied Hannibal carefully. He admired him. He learned from him. In Spain, he struck swiftly, capturing New Carthage. In a bold amphibious assault, he dismantled Carthaginian control in Iberia. Cutting off Hannibal's reinforcements and silver supplethen, he did something daring. Proposed to carry the war to Africa, be invading Carthage's homeland. He would force Hannibal to leave Italy. The Roman Senate hesitated, but eventually agreed. In 100 for BC, Roman legions landed in North Africa. Carthage panicked. They recalled Hannibal. After nearly 15 years in Italy, he sailed home. Final confrontation would take place not on Roman soil, but on African grounds. The final duel in 100 BC near the town of Zama. Hannibal and Scipio met. Woe of the greatest commanders of antiquity face to face. Hannibal deployed elephants in the front ranks, hoping to shatter Roman formations. Behind them stood a mixture of mercenary citizen troops and veterans from Italy. Scipio, having studied previous battles, adjusted his formation. He left Carters between Manibal's open lanes through which charging elephants could pass. Trumpets blared to frighten them. Javelins struck their flanks. Many elephants panicked. They veered aside, trampling Carthaginian ranks. Then infantry lines met. For a time, the battle hung uncertain, but Roman cavalry, including Numidian horsemen who had once served Hannibal, gained superiority in a cruel symmetry. They returned to strike Carthaginian forces from behind. Hannibal tasted his own tactics, encircling flanks, was defeated at the end of an Arath. Peace terms were devastating. Carthage lost its fleet, its overseas territories. It was forced to pay immense indemnities. It could wage no war without Roman permission. Once great maritime empire became a client. Stat Hannibal did not die in battle. Years later, pursued by Roman agents while in exile in the east, he took poison rather than be captured. Livy records his final words, "Let us free the Romans from their anxiety, since they think it too long to wait for an old man's death." A bitter, proud, and legacious Second Punic War reshaped the Mediterranean. Rome emerged not merely victorious, but dominant. Within decades, it would crush Macedon, subdue Greece, and extend influence across the known world. Carthage would linger for half a century before being utterly destroyed in the Third Punic War, but Hannibal's shadow never disappeared. His crossing of the Alps remains one of history's boldest maneuvers. His double envelopment at Cannae is still studied in military academies. Even his enemies respected him. Centuries later, Roman generals would invoke his name as a benchmark of brilliance. Final reflection: Hannibal proved that genius can shake empires. Rome proved that resilience can outlast genius. War that nearly destroyed Rome instead forged it into something harder, more relentless, more imperial. History remembers Cannae as a masterpiece, but it remembers Rome's recovery as something perhaps even greater, because in the end the Republic survived not by brilliance alone, but by endurance. Perhaps that is the final lesson of this war. Victory wins battle, endurance wins history. Thank you for watching.